I think we should dive into talking about bosses, even though you and I currently don't have one.
Yeah.
But we have a long history of having bosses.
Yeah.
And let's like share what makes them good, what makes them bad.
Okay. Do you have a bad boss?
I have
Like
a
in your
couple.
history? Yeah.
Yeah,
Who's
I have
the
a
worst?
couple that were just like not bad. They were doing their best. They
Yeah.
just maybe weren't meant for that role,
That
you know?
is a beautiful way to say that.
Yeah.
As opposed to
Yeah.
like, he's such a dick or she was awful or whatever. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, everyone's doing their best. Maybe just not the best time for them in that role, or they weren't
Yeah.
given the tools for success that they
Yeah,
needed.
exactly.
That's a good
Yeah.
preface to this. Yeah.
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 Tell me about your bad boss.
Well, I think they're just
Experience.
I'm gonna pick it from a couple and just like talk about the traits that are maybe like
Mhm.
not ideal because I kind of want to keep it anonymous. But like
I like can't
everything
wait in my
from
head. I'm like, I know who it is. I hate mine. Yeah. I'll tell you exactly. No.
Yeah,
Just-
no, no, yeah, like great people, just like really interesting qualities. But anything from like micromanaging
Yep.
and then in the same week, like zero communication, like, yeah, like what is happening with that?
All or nothing.
And then everyone will agree with this is this like lack of payment on time, like, and
Oh,
grossly outside of the appropriate amount of time, you know?
yeah. Yeah. That one's
Yeah.
wild. That goes beyond being
Labor
a
laws,
boss, and that's just
I
yeah.
think.
Yeah, that makes me cringe. Like
Yeah.
paying people, and
Yeah.
you hear about that I've heard about that a little bit. I spent a lot of time in the service industry, which actually surprisingly most of my bad bosses, and I haven't had many, but don't come from that because you're
Yeah.
usually nice working as a collaborative team. Then you
Yes.
also have the owner who can be so fantastic, owner of the restaurant,
Mhm.
bar, whatever, or who's totally disconnected and
Yes.
like out to lunch.
Yeah.
But what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, the terrible stories about people like waiting to get their tips, like getting their tips pooled or taken away from them until like a incentivized later time. I don't know. I'm like not a professional in labor laws in Canada, so I don't know if that's legal or not, but when I hear that, that is awful because you're
Yeah.
paid below minimum wage as a server, and that's everybody relies on their tips. That's the thing. That's the reason
Mhm.
why you're working your ass off in the job. But
Yeah.
yeah, I hear about that in the service industry sometimes, and those restaurants. I'm like, that's bananas to me.
Is that for tip pooling? Because when I was a server, it was typically you just like cashed out and then you kept what was ever was extra, and so you had it that day. But I wonder if it's like a tip pooling situation where a whole restaurant splits everything, you know?
That's one of the cases I heard about recently.
Mhm.
Cases, but where you'll be on the same shift with somebody and you pool all of your tips, and then so what
Mhm.
happens is you'll have somebody working really hard
Yeah, that gets
and
spicy.
somebody not working that hard because
Yeah.
what does it matter? And then all their tips go
Mhm.
into one bucket and then they get split, which is different
Yeah.
from tipping out. So tipping out would be,
Yes, it
okay, I'm
was
going to give some of
20%
my tip,
to the kitchen. Yeah.
obviously, to the kitchen, to whatever, which is a totally different thing.
Mhm.
And I don't disagree with that either, but it all depends on how people are getting paid, right? Like if you're a
Mhm.
server and you're getting paid half of what minimum wage is, like
Yeah.
then, and the kitchen staff is not, and they're getting paid
Yeah.
minimum wage, then how? Anyway, you get into that whole
Do
debate. It's been
you
a
think
really long time since I was in the service industry, but I heard about
we're
that
gonna
recently.
go
Drove me crazy.
we're gonna go micro tangent here. Do
Yeah.
you think servers should be paid differently? Like, do you think, or sorry, do you think tips should be eliminated from the Canadian system?
That's a hard one.
Mhm.
You'd have to pay people a lot. That's the hard problem.
Yeah.
You couldn't afford
Mhm.
them. Actually that I feel like that's almost simple. Is
Yeah.
the average restaurant owner. So a restaurant on average, and this is because Scott's in M&A,
Yeah.
so on average makes a very low profit margin. Or
Yeah.
if you don't know what you're doing or you're new or whatever, or you're going through a downturn, you're losing money. So
Mhm.
they operate like in around 5% as a profit margin,
Mhm.
which is not a lot of money to take home. For a business,
Yeah.
it's a lot of work. A lot of people get into the restaurant industry because they think they can do it, or they served or managed or whatever. And they're like, I'll make so much money. And they kind of see margins, but some people make more, of course, but on average, it's very low profit margin, high work, high stress, but high turnover staff. Aside from that, you just can't afford to pay people what they would make, because some servers will make like
$300 a night, or maybe
yeah,
even
like
more.
you're making 20, 30, $40 an hour.
Yeah.
So like just wouldn't be sustainable as a business model to pay people what it requires for them to do the job. That's what I think, like as a person who spent my youth serving, you know, and bartending, that's the biggest draw. Like I would go into work, I'd bartend, and I'd go into work at 10 o'clock at night and work till 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And you're like cleaning up after the bar at 4 a.m. All your friends came in and partied and you're hustling, and I was happy, so happy to do it. I loved it, being an extrovert and also making money. I'm like, I'm here, I'm at the bar and I'm printing cash right now. And you walk out like $500 in your pocket, and it was the best. But like, there's no way the nights that, and then this is bad bosses, bad jobs. The few that I worked where you didn't make that money, you didn't have that volume, you'd have a boss who would, like, I had a boss in the restaurant industry once who would actually take tables in my section because they were her friends. I'm like, come on, like it's already dead in here, and you're gonna actually take these tables because it's your friends, so that they'll tip you more or whatever. And and you're the manager, so you actually get paid more to be here.
And you aren't supposed to be tipped, basically. You're exempt from tipping.
So that sucked. And that was probably the only restaurant bar experience job that I worked at that I actually hated. And it was partially because of the manager.
I remember getting a job at a pub and being put, after having like the best other restaurant gig, and then getting put on the bar, and it was like day service, and it was like lunch, whatever, and it was like, oh, it's just not the fairness. And that's all I gotta say about that.
You'll see
just like the different positions.
You'll see really fast how many people do not want or have no interest in serving and bartending if you were to pay them, honestly, even if you were to pay them minimum wage or even $20 an hour nowadays, I feel like is for a person in their 20s. This is a lot of work for not a lot of money.
When I was a server in Australia, like I was getting $20 an hour, but that was in the like early 2000s. And I don't know what their minimum wage is, or if that's just like a server thing, but there's no tipping there. And so I wonder what it would be currently. It'd be good to Google that.
Opposite end of that, I was in the States talking to a friend also like in the 2000s.
Sorry guys.
Sorry. And their minimum wage was like, their servers made like $4 or $6 an hour. It was like insane. I'm like, you can't even
like a breakfast waitress
at McDonald's for that much. That's insane.
No. Yeah, exactly. What breakfast waitress where there's no booze markup? You know, you're selling coffees and pancakes, and it's like the bill's $3. How is that going to work?
Totally. Actually, unless I will say this about breakfast, because I've done breakfast. My favorites are breakfast and bar because turnover. So you're like,
that's the thing.
Breakfast. If you're at like a Greasy Spoon, whatever, like high turnover, and sometimes those lower bills with high turnover. So if you think about buying a beer at a bar, and you tip 50 cents or $1 on a $5 beer, or you have $120 meal and they'll tip sometimes like 10 or $20. So there's like a massive disproportionate amount there for the amount of work that it took you. So you might do that $120 bill, and you'll have 2 or 3 of those you could all night, you know, whereas you'll serve how many beers, how many cocktails at $1 a piece or 50 cents a piece. And that's what I loved. Or a like $10 bill still feels appropriate to tip like $2 or $3. You're like, okay. But you're turning that over and over and over. So that's what I would say about high turnover, is where money's made. In my opinion, I always liked it better than doing fine dining. But that's a different beast.
It is a different beast for sure. What is your story or highlights of your bad boss?
Okay, I have a bad boss story that I have shared before. anyways, I worked pre-BART industry when I was like 17 through to into college at a skateboard shop, which you wouldn't think you'd have a bad boss necessarily. But this was a very small chain. So one owner, and he just was, I think part of the thing is feeling like you're working hard and you're invisible. So feeling devalued or just not valued, I think is a core issue for people, because, and that's an intrinsic motivator. So you could talk about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivators. And this is now you're into the like leadership 101. If you want to motivate people, you can motivate them extrinsically, which is a job title, or pay is an extrinsic motivator. Benefits is an extrinsic motivator. Freaking pizza parties, extrinsic motivator. All those things work in a very short term. So it's like, great, thanks for the party. And then a month later, they're like, I don't want to be here. You're like, I just threw you jerks a party and I gave you a raise and I
gave you a
promoted you and you got your hat and like
chain.
Yeah, those are extrinsic and they work for a very short period of time. So that's why people get frustrated. It's like, I just gave you, and I've heard this story so much, I just gave them a raise and they want to quit. I'm like, yeah, it's because that raise bought you, I don't know, a month, maybe.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what part of the issue is that I've found professional experience is what I've found is that by the time an employee is fighting for a raise and you give them the raise, it doesn't have the same effect that you think it will have because they felt like it was already owed to them.
Yes.
So that raise to you is like, I just gave them a bump, but for them, they're like, I already earned this and I should have been making it in the first place, or I should have been making this 6 months ago. So now I'm at neutral as far as pay goes. I was low paid. Now I'm at neutral paid.
Yeah.
I'm not increased. I'm just where I should have been. So then you would have to almost like pay them again. I tell people, if you
makes sense.
Yeah. And that's why it often doesn't work for people, because they have to beg for it or ask for it or plead their case.
Or get the courage to ask for it,
Yeah. And they feel like it was already owed to them. So they're like, well, that's just what I should have been making. So you actually didn't do me any favors. I'm still doing you a favor. That's the mindset. Whereas I tell people, I'm like, if you think somebody's worth more money, pay them that way before they ask. Just pay them. I think you're worth $20 an hour. Maybe you're making 15. Like maybe it's a massive raise, but if they're a really good employee, they work their butt off, they're loyal, they're good at their job, just pay them more money and then they'll feel appreciated. So this was me. I was paid like $12 an hour because also in 2000s. when we had jobs and bosses. And I was like 16 and then I was promoted. Here it is. I was promoted to manager of a store, and you're left totally on your own, which wasn't the worst thing ever. It's like skate shop and bro out with your friends or whatever. But I took it seriously because I'm a like hard worker. Yeah. I was raised by like Italian dad. You work, you hustle, whatever. Big like time. I wasn't a slacker. And I'm like doing everything that involved managing a store. And this is first year of university. So you're like, 19, 20, you don't know anything. You think you know everything. But yeah, he just like, honestly, in 5 years, I don't think the owner of the store, I probably saw him 10 times. I don't think he ever even learned my name. And I'm like, I've been working for you. Like he would come in and be like, hi, I'm Bleep. And I'm like,
isn't that humanitarian basics?
I'm like, Eve. I've worked for you at 2 of your locations now. I run this location for 5 years.
That is brutal.
You want to see like loyalty go down the tube. You want to see employee theft go up. Forget their name. Forget that they work for you.
Exactly.
And then I found out that another manager doing the exact same job at another store was getting paid more. And I asked for more money and they said no. I'm like, hey, I'm doing the same job and I would appreciate, like, let's talk about making the same amount that you're paying this guy over here. I think I was making like $10 an hour and they were making 12, something like that. Like, no, like I hate
What was the timeline of you asking for a raise and not getting it from when you left?
Probably a year.
Oh yeah, okay.
Still probably a while. Yeah, but that was only because the
A lot of
actual
resentment.
job I really liked.
Yeah.
Because I was like, you're with your crew, snowboard shop, skate shop. Like, so if I didn't like the job, obviously you'd be out of there in a second.
Yeah.
So it was lack of management, lack of leadership, lack of value, lack of caring, lack of pay.
All of it.
Fun job for your 20-year-old.
Dang.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a 20-year-old. Yeah.
That's my
I love those jobs.
Story.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell more about your horrible bosses? What else stuck out for you?
I mean, I just think about the range of like jobs working at a water slides with like zero training, just getting thrown into the job. Like at a till, I'm like managing money and people paying. And I'm like, I'm just out of high school. I don't know how this works. Like, and it's like, I couldn't find the manager or the owner, and people are asking me first. I was like, I've been here for a day.
Yeah. It's my first day.
Yeah.
It's like The Simpsons. It's my first day. It's my first day. It's like, in your 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Nothing else is standing out. Just sort of, there's been enough time between me and my having bosses, that I'm just like, moved on.
Okay, let's do a how to be an awesome boss recap. Value people.
Learn their names.
Learn their name.
Just
pay them appropriately. Train them. So give them the tools for success. What else?
I also find that
don't micromanage, but don't under micromanage. Or undermanage.
Just treat them how they're presenting. Like, do they need support? Do they need less managing? Just like read the room.
Read the room. Meet people where they're at, knowing that.
Yeah.
So, and this is one that
autonomy is a big one.
Yeah. This one that frustrates me is if you hire a person because for a lower wage, and I've dealt with this as well with consulting, if you hire a person who is less skilled because you want to pay them less. So they're like, I'll bring in an entry level person into this job, whether the job is entry level or not, and think that they're going to have all the tools for success and you won't need to fill in that gap yourself. You're extremely misinformed. So that's one thing I deal with, I've dealt with before. And it's, well, I hired this person for this 20-year-old for $16 an hour. And, she's worked for me for 3 months and she can't do the job. Or I have to keep helping her. Like, well, yeah, you didn't hire a person for $40 an hour who's done the job before, who's a professional in their field, who has a niche in that and experience in that area. You chose the person at a fraction of the cost.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to make up that gap.
Yeah.
So just either choose to pay them more, pay the person who can walk into a job and do that job, which, by the way, you want. But in most cases, is more money. And so people getting a deal, but what they don't realize is it costs them time. But you have to put in the time, way more time, but don't expect, and then really have a good system for providing tools for success. So this was that, not having systems and clarity in what the role entails, how to do that job correctly. That's a huge, people feeling like they can master and have job success. That's a huge intrinsic motivator. So a demotivator for a lot of people then on the other side of that is feeling like they're never going to be caught up. They're never going to be successful at their current job, regardless of what that job is. If they feel like they're constantly set up to fail, that's a demotivator. And that's one that a lot of people might not realize is happening, that it's like, hey, you keep changing the system. There is no system.
Yeah.
We're dealing with these problems here. Everybody wants to achieve, they want to be a professional in what they're doing. They want to be good at what they do and achieve success that way. And if their job and their manager or their boss isn't providing them the tools to do a really good job, then that's where you'll find that person's starting to check out and want to leave.
And another demotivator is lack of growth potential, I think. When you're kind of stuck at a certain level and there's not a place you can aspire to grow to, if you're like, oh, this is just the level that I'm going to be at for the next 20 years, you're like,
yeah,
it's not. Some people, it just doesn't work for them.
Yeah, and some people are fine with that, but I think it's knowing, it's clarity.
Yeah.
It's like I have my 3 C's of leadership: culture, clarity, caring. And that's part of clarity too, is knowing, okay, what does my life look like in this role? And you could work for, and there's a lot of jobs like that in this town. Like if you work for a major industry, logging industry, CP would be an example of that.
Yeah.
It's consistent and reliable and very clear. It's like, this is exactly what my life is going to be like.
Yes.
When I'm going to retire, this is what my job is going to be like. I am totally okay without having upward mobility or different mobility. I'll leave if I want to, if that's not enough for me, but at least I know exactly what my future looks like. And this the future of this company looks like. And that's a individual difference of what their needs are. They might have, and then you can plan accordingly. You're like, okay, I have this job, it's not going anywhere, and my pay isn't going anywhere. It's actually paid very well. Maybe I'm bored, maybe it's mundane, maybe it's whatever, maybe I love it because it is consistent and I'm in a known. And I can then go and buy the boat that I want to buy, or buy the toy or whatever, knowing that that's not going to get taken away from me. My job isn't just going to disappear overnight. Whereas if you have people who, and this happens a lot in small business, you don't, because there might not be a lot of upward mobility, because it's like you can visibly see the chain of command and it ends with the owner.
Yes.
Right there. So unless you buy in, which also is a thing, but it's like, okay, well, that's where I'm going to go. Then how long are you going to stay there? But what's the vision? What does it look like for that person?
Right.
We've hired people knowing that it's a stepping stone for them.
Right. Okay.
In our old company, I was like, and that I found was a good way to approach it and to get really good staff is like asking them, what do you want out of your career? Like, what are your goals? We can provide like a stepping stone for that. If you're looking to get here, we can be step 1 and step 2, and then you will move on and go do step 3 and 4.
Really cool.
And somewhere else at another company. And that's okay, because we still might have you hopefully for 4 or 5 years.
And once again, that's that clarity that brings a lot of peace with it.
It really does. Yeah. If it's unclear, people need to know.
Yeah, they do.
On some rudimentary level.
Even if they don't even know, even if they don't think they need to know, it's like,
there's not a lot of people, and those people who don't need the clarity, which I don't know who that is, don't stay in jobs long anyway.
That's exactly it.
You're in a transient nature because your clarity is personal clarity of, let's say, I don't know, I'm thinking of like the nomad.
Living here for 3 months and I need to buy some gas to get out of here.
I don't need a vision from you. I'm good.
Yeah.
I just need to like make
whiskey.
X amount of dollars a day to pay off my past and live my life, and then I'm out, and then I'm gonna
buy beer.
Do my career another time in my life
in 10 years from now.
That's that human.
Exactly.
Which I've been that human. I'm like, I'm not.
Me 100%. I was that human for a while.
Well, this is good.
Great. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you for sharing. Good bosses, bad bosses, they exist. Share your stories if anybody's listening and has a story, or even just an idea. What made person that you worked for the best ever that you would recommend, 5 stars, or kind of the worst, knowing that they were, just to reiterate your comment at the start, they were doing their best. Which isn't necessarily your best, but it is their best. It's the best they could do. And
also any other comment or topics you want us to cover, mention them.
We're here all day. Not actually, but
no. I cut you off. You were gonna say something.
I was gonna say
that was a big
I just had a thought that is some manager compassion, is to remember that, and this was on if you do have a boss who's you're not extremely satisfied with, they're a human, but also they might not, they have a boss. Sometimes they have a boss,
Yeah.
right? And so if you're a manager, they might not have the tools needed to be successful, to manage
Yeah.
you correctly. And like part of that is, and this is like the last PSA I'll put in, is if you have managers, you also need to set time in their job and in their role for them to actually manage people, as opposed to a lot of times managers, it's like, well, they have like 17 jobs still,
Yeah.
especially if it's a small growing company, and then they're failing to manage their team. Well, it's because there's no time allocated to manage. It's all
Yes.
work, like busy
Yeah.
work or whatever. But you need time to actually, if you're going to manage people, putting that in air quotes, you need to communicate and connect with them. And if a manager doesn't have time to do that, then yeah, they're going to be ineffective. And that might not be have anything to do with that might not be their fault.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
benefit of the doubt. Yeah.
There you go. Sweet. Well, thanks for listening.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah. Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks, guys.